The main conclusions in this report were that the clubs in the top 4 divisions of English football are taking enormous financial risks, and nearly half of them have less than 1 month's cash reserve to cover their operating costs. Is precarious, to say the least.
Welcome to Listen Without Prejudice, the podcast from Bishop and Sewell. Each episode brings you expert insights, practical advice, and real stories from one of London's leading law firms. From property and private client matters to business law, family, and dispute resolution, we're here to inform, guide, and inspire. Let's get started.
Welcome back to the show. My name is Andrew Kavanagh. I'm a partner in the corporate team, and sat opposite me is my trusted colleague, Charles, also a solicitor in the corporate team. And today we're going to be discussing the hot topic of football governance and the amount of progress that's been made since we last talked about this in January. Over to you.
Over to me, yeah. So I think in January 25, you did an episode with David, who's another member of the corporate commercial team, one of our resident sports experts, and you spoke about what the football governance bill, as it was at the time, was hoping to achieve.
We were very excited about these proposals.
Absolutely, and the update, and I suppose this is a bit of a spoiler for the whole episode, is that it's now received royal assent. So what was the bill has now turned into the Football Governance Act 2025. And what's the practical implication of that? Well, I don't think there is one at the moment.
Yeah, that's a fair summary.
There were a few main points. The main one is the establishment of the independent football regulator, a regulating body which has a greater level of oversight and input into the current sport of football at the top levels.
It was going to deal with the licensing. It was going to...
Yes, so the main idea was that the independent football regulator would have the ability to license clubs and monitor their financial stability. So there were to be two types of licenses: a provisional license, which in the first instance is what the clubs would apply for, and then in the 3 years following the grant of the provisional license, they would work towards obtaining a full license. And a full license, and indeed a provisional license, has a load of sort of standards attached which the clubs need to meet. And there was recently actually a report, sort of a detailed analysis that was released by an organisation called Fair Game. They spent, I think, 4 months conducting an analysis of all of the clubs in the English Football League. So that's
a snapshot of how it is today.
Absolutely, yeah. How those clubs are getting on in relation to the standards required by the license setup, I suppose you would call it, the requirements of the licenses.
Yeah.
So that's all the clubs down from the Premier League to the National League North and South. And the main question was, how many of those 164 clubs are regulator ready? And the answer was 5.
Stunning.
So that was Brighton Hove Albion, Cambridge United, Carlisle United, AFC Wimbledon, and Bath City.
So most of the Premier League are ill-equipped and underprepared for the current standards.
Yeah, well, 95% of the Premier League. Yeah, it's only Brighton that cut the mustard at the moment. So the main conclusions in this report were that the clubs in the top 4 divisions of English football are taking enormous financial risks. And nearly half of them have less than 1 month's cash reserve to cover their operating costs, which is precarious, to say the least.
It was kind of the old adage, wasn't it? You'd buy a football club to lose money, not make money.
Well, exactly.
And that's probably, unfortunately, still a precarious position for a lot of the clubs out there. I think it's interesting. If you're going to take a snapshot of the current pyramid, lay across the top of that the rules that we're anticipating to come into force in their existing format, just how far clubs are falling. I think all of this is great. I think greater governance, greater transparency, I think it's going to help, I think, the game, certainly domestically and globally. But you can just see the writing on the wall for so much pushback, because the clubs aren't going to want to be stretched any further than they already are. Can't increase always the ground space, the gate costs of how much revenue you take a weekend. And they're not going to willingly have something draped around their neck, dragging them down financially. But it's going to be an interesting tussle.
Well, absolutely. And it doesn't help, of course, that there has to date been no real guidance on how any of the clubs should actually bring their standards up to meet the requirements of this licensing system.
Cool.
So they've been pretty clear on the penalties, which can be as severe as suspension or revocation of a club's operating license, which would mean that its team is withdrawn entirely from the league. It's been quite clear that the independent regulator will be entitled to impose financial penalties of up to 10% of a club's revenue. And they have, to be fair to them, said that they might, if it came to it, appoint a person to assist in the running of a club. But beyond those sort of severe penalties or the limited guidance that might come with the appointment of a person to assist in running a club, they've not made clear how indeed these clubs should get up to scratch. So, for example, in this fair game report, one of the main points that was raised was that 50% of clubs in the English Football League, so 82 out of 164, receive sponsorship from either gambling or alcohol-related companies.
Yeah, big business.
And it's all well and good saying that that's a problem and that the ethics need to improve. But the reality is that these clubs are presented with sponsorship offers, and invariably, the gambling and alcohol-related ones are significantly higher than anything else that might be on the table for them. I mean, I'm an Aston Villa fan, and I remember
Sorry to hear that.
there was a fan consultation group that kicked up a fuss a couple of seasons ago
Yeah.
because we had sort of yet another gambling company on the front of the shirt. And the club sat the group down and said, look, the reality is that if we go with a different sponsor, we will receive less than 50% of the total package.
And how do you plug the gap?
And how do you plug the gap? Exactly. And this is sort of just one example of many where it's completely unclear how actually these clubs are meant to abide by these requirements.
I think it's an interesting one. I think this is setting up for quite a widespread collaboration between, maybe the Premier League and the Championship kind of lead on behalf of the clubs. But I think it's like with any legislation, if you're going to introduce it without some fairly scary looking teeth, people aren't going to take it seriously. So the threats, revocation of a license, removal from your relative league, I think they have to be high in order to get people's attention. But I think it's telling that there's a lack of detail on the practical, on the ground, operational level. Because I think they probably don't want to, inhibit or cripple possibly the single largest commercial export the country has. So I think there's going to be a lot of toing and froing. And I don't think that's a bad thing, because the last thing we want is more clubs going out of business. But I think from a governance perspective and from a time frame perspective, this has probably got years to run on it, hasn't it? A couple of seasons worth.
I would think so. And I would also expect a lot of people will take a bit of cream off the top. I mean, if you divide governance into the corporate governance side and the financial governance side, within both of those categories, there are scores of professions and professionals that dedicate their careers to assessing and improving governance matters that need assessing and improving.
I think in some ways it's reminiscent of the comparing sectors, the 2008 financial crash, the subprime mortgage fallouts, and then the bank aligning regulation to say, look, if you're going to be dealing with customer money, you need to have a buffer in there. You need to be guaranteeing accounts up to 80,000 or whatever it might be, but there's a financial buffer that sits there. And you can see them kind of maybe going that way towards the football clubs to say that you need to be run more delicately with your finances to have that kind of financial buffer. But if at the same time you then with the other hand say, we're going to rip your revenue for tobacco and alcohol, or gambling, whatever it might be. It's not going to work. So watch this space, I think, is where we're at.
Absolutely. And I mean, with all that being said, I think the idea behind the Football Governance Act and the independent regulator is a good one. I mean, too many times we've seen clubs destroyed or on the brink of being destroyed due to poor financial oversight or just general terrible mismanagement.
Yeah.
It's reassuring to know that at least the intention is there to stop those things from happening.
Yeah, agreed. Perfect. So tune in another 7 months to see how far we got. Excellent, Charles. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Andy.
That's all for today's episode of Listen Without Prejudice. Whether you're navigating a property transaction, a corporate, commercial, or family matter, we're here to guide you every step of the way. If you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date on future episodes, where we'll continue to explore the latest trends and challenges across our core practice areas. Do you have a question or topics you'd like us to cover? Or do you want to reach one of our experts? Feel free to get in touch via LinkedIn or through our website, bishopandsewell.co.uk. Thanks again for tuning in. Be sure to join us in our next episode, where the conversation continues. Until then, take care.